There's a new podcast called Now What's Next from Morgan Stanley. It's filled with stories of people trying to adapt to and look beyond the global crisis we're facing. Chefs, entrepreneurs, healthcare workers, grounded world travelers. There's even an astronaut. Their stories are unique and their outlooks are optimistic. Listen to Now What's Next wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Autoline After Hours with John McElroy and Gary Vasilash, episode 549 for March 25th of 2021. Volkswagen aims the ID4 right at Tesla's Model Y. Watch Autoline After Hours live at Autoline.tv every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 12 p.m. Pacific. You can subscribe to this podcast for free by searching for Autoline in iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey, and by Borg Warner, propulsion solutions that support a clean, energy-efficient world.
Mr. Vasilash.
How are you, John?
I'm doing great. I know I always say that, but it's true. We're about to do another great show.
Yes, we are, and absolutely. So last week, I stumped you with something that happened in 2018. That was the Uber accident. So now I'm going to go back a few more years, but I'm going to give you two solid clues.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
Two. All right, so this is about a vehicle that was introduced in 2005. Okay? Now, here are your two clues. One, there is a connection to Tesla. And two, there is a connection to someone who has been a multiple guest on After Hours.
Oh, my gosh. Geez. So, yeah, I should know the answer to that. 2005, you said?
Correct.
And it's
introduced
in
2005.
And it's somebody who's been a multiple guest on the show. So what else did Tesla do?
No, I said there's a connection to Tesla.
Connection to Tesla. So that's very, very early days for Tesla.
Think away from that a little bit.
Man, I'm racking my brain. And somebody who's been on the show a lot. You got me. I'm stumped.
It was the introduction of the Saturn Sky.
Oh!
Designed by Franz von Halsen, who is the head of design for Tesla.
Yes.
And Bob Lutz was instrumental in the development of the Kappa architecture, which also underpinned the Pontiac Solstice, which, of course, the underpinnings of the Saturn Sky.
Yeah. In fact, I want to say Mark Royce. I don't know if he oversaw the program.
So there you have it.
Yeah, no, that's pretty good, Gary. Yep.
All right, so stumped you twice.
I know.
You were on a roll a few weeks ago, so
I know. And you even gave me a couple of clues, and it didn't work.
Yeah, well, we tried.
Well, let's get this out of my mind. Let's bring in Sebastian Blanco, who's joining us today. There he is. Hey, Sebastian.
There I am. Hi, John. Hi, Gary. How you guys doing today?
Good. How are you?
Good. Can I play the trivia game? I've got a VW-related trivia thing, which might fit well with today's episode.
Okay, try us.
So which, usually as products come out, the Apple iPhone or whatever, the higher the number, the better. So which car, and the hint is it's a VW car, if you increase the number in the name, would actually make it a worse vehicle? The limited series production.
Is this sort of like a pun on the so if I said Golf 8 and then it would be Golf 9 and 9 sounds like
right. That's
none,
good, but no.
Okay.
It was the well, maybe we could ask our guest, but the answer is the XL1. The idea was that it could go 100 kilometers on 1 liter of fuel, and if it took 2 liters, well, that's a lot worse now.
Well, Sebastian, you're way too brainy for us.
My one fun piece of automotive trivia I like to stump people with.
Just in case people are wondering, Sebastian actually is in a vehicle right now because he's a true automotive journalist.
So we should explain, you're in your vehicle parked near your local library because it's got better Wi-Fi connection than what you can get, because you're out in the sticks, right? In Western Michigan.
Correct. Yep, I'm here south of Grand Rapids, north of Kalamazoo, and if I was at home, it would be all stuttery, and so I figured I'd come here and try to get it as smooth as possible for Autoline After Hours. Yahoo!
We're glad you did.
And we're glad for Benjamin Franklin for founding the public library system.
Yes. We'll give bonus points to viewers who can identify my car based on this little screen they can see.
I'm going to guess a minivan.
Nope. Well, it's a small hatchback, but not a minivan.
Okay. Well, you got almost a semi-fisheye lens. It makes it look longer from this angle.
Yes.
Hey,
all right, on with the show.
Enough of guessing. Let's get on with our guest today. Let's bring him in. He's Heinz Schaefer. He's the Senior Vice President of Product Marketing and Strategy at Volkswagen of America. And Heinz, welcome to Autoline After Hours.
Hey, John. Thanks for the invite. Morning. Hey, Gary. And hey, Sebastian. Very nice to be with you. I'm very glad I didn't get that question, by the way, because I think I would have failed.
Heinz, we got a lot to talk about with this ID4. I guess the first question I would have, just to get the conversation rolling here, is, clearly Tesla has captured the EV segment. They've got whatever it is, 75% market share or something like that. Who's going to be your customer? Are you going to start stealing customers away from Tesla? Or where do you think people are going to come into the showrooms from?
Yeah, I think we've quite publicly come out and said that we really, respect what Tesla has done and the market that they've grown. I think even up to Dr. Diess in Germany, who's had several interactions with Elon Musk, has been, very grateful for the path that Tesla's laid. I think if you look at a lot of Tesla's conquest volume, it has come from a lot of the premium brands. And yes, of course, I think there's going to be cross-shopping between Model 3, Model Y, and ID4. But I think what we're really going after in our car is we're saying, this is the first electric vehicle where we feel it makes sense for a whole bunch of reasons. It's got the proportions of a real SUV. It's got good spacious comfort in the second row. It's got a decent sized trunk. It looks and feels like an SUV. And then if you take the starting price of $40,000 and deduct off your available federal tax credits, you're kind of almost in a reasonably priced RAV4, CX-5, or Tiguan. So I would say probably our primary target really is to get a very well-priced compact SUV, whether you're looking at an ICE or a battery electric vehicle. So that's really where we're going after. We've also, in our package included 3 years of fast charging with Electrify America to also take away any sort of range anxiety. So we're really going after this car, saying this is a no-compromise SUV and a real good alternative, not only if you're a Tesla Model 3 or Model Y customer, but even if you're looking at a well-equipped RAV4 or Tiguan.
Hein, what is it about this EV that would make someone who has all their lives bought an internal combustion engine-powered vehicle say, okay, I'm not going to get that RAV4, I'm not going to get that CR-V or Equinox or what have you. I'm going to go after this. I mean, what do you see as the real compelling reason for this?
So I think, first of all, the comfort and space is not compromised. I think very often previously when you had to consider an EV, you were probably looking at something a little bit smaller, something that you couldn't fit kids in the second row, something where the trunk was heavily compromised. So this gives you the proportions. Secondly, the car's got reasonably decent range. We've got 250 miles. As I said, we've got the EA charge package. So, going from town to town even is not such a massive challenge. And then last but not least, I think the value proposition is now there. No longer are you needing to spend $55,000 or $60,000. If you take this available federal tax credit out, you're down to $32,000. We've done rough mathematics that suggests over a 3 to 5 year period, you're saving over $3,000 in fuel savings. So it's easy to charge. It's simple to charge. You can have a wall box installed at home. You can avoid all gas stations. It can take the kids, the wives, the dogs. It can tow. So it really is what we believe is a no-compromise SUV. The other beauty about the car is that it's so simple to operate. I think often people think EVs, they think, oh my gosh, it's going to be complex, and they're extremely concerned about that. This car is very minimalistic inside. The Kessie system works by putting your bum in the seat, the vehicle's on, you twist a lever, and off you go. So it's not intimidating to use. It drives like a GTI. I mean, it's got semi-decent acceleration. The car is planted, sure-footed. So it's just so easy to live with. And I think this is why all of a sudden electric vehicles are starting to make sense. All these compromises and range anxiety of the past, I think, are now starting to kind of dwindle away. And I think at $32,000 or $33,000, this should be on your shopping list.
Go ahead, Sebastian.
I wanted to talk a little bit more about some of the technical aspects of a car like this. I mean, this is coming on the MEB platform. As you're looking forward, like, how does this connect with the unified batteries and things that Volkswagen talked about, what was it, a week or two ago now? Like, are you learning things from the design and hopefully the use of this car that will influence that? Or is this sort of, in some sense, the end of the line when it comes to the MEB, or is that going to be evolving with these unified batteries here?
It's still work in progress, I would say. But yes, I do think there will be a development of the platform in future. There are further discussions, much like we had with MQB, to ultimately land on a very flexible platform that can package, bigger and smaller batteries. So I do think probably, call it 5 to 6 years from now, there'll definitely be developments, whether it will still be called MEB or whether potentially get some sort of a new name. The definite plan is to have a flexible platform on which obviously we can build and scale up on different types of vehicles. So that's definitely part of the plan, yes.
And part of the unified batteries is the idea that it could, you have different chemistries so you can reduce cost. What is the, sort of the compelling message for people looking at an ID4 now versus they maybe have a relatively new gas-powered vehicle and they might want to wait a few more years? Like, what is your compelling reason to say, no, try the ID4 right now, and then we can talk about these future EVs when the time comes?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, I think a lot has been said about the development of the batteries. I think it is going to take a bit of time. I think, we often make use of the cell phone industry where we started with, big batteries, not very efficient, and we're now down to very small phones that are extremely efficient and obviously carrying a lot of processing power. So I do think it's going to take a couple of years to get the battery cost levels down and to get the efficiency levels up. So no doubt there. We are obviously working on continually improving the range as we go through the various model years. And I think there'll be small increments of range improvements over the next couple of years. But I would probably say that it will take, a couple of years to get some of this new battery technology into the platform and see, remarkable, increases in range. I also think then obviously as those range, efficiency increases on a battery, you also then have the ability to slot a smaller battery into a car, get more efficiency on the range and get a very comparable range to what we have today. But I don't think that in terms of timeline is around the corner. I don't think it's next year, potentially not the year thereafter. I think it's going to take a bit of time to get to that point.
Hi, we got a question here from Todd from Long Beach, California. He says he's curious why Volkswagen decided against offering single pedal driving. He's an EV owner and he says that's one of his favorite features and wonders if that might be an over-the-air upgrade that you could do in the future.
Yeah, I think the strategy as to why, I think, is tough to explain. I think, the drive unit that we have is the drive unit that we have. It's clear that I think a lot of our development happens in Germany. So that is where we're at. I don't have any current updates, whether that might change with the over-the-air updates or whether it may potentially come with the facelift. It is something that we're aware of. It is something that we're talking about, but for sure nothing yet on the radar in terms of changing that.
Hein, the Tiguan is a very nice package, and it seems to me that you guys are in some ways competing with yourself with the ID4 and the Tiguan. How do you rationalize that?
Look, I think we're going through an interesting phase, right? I think we all understand that battery electric vehicles are starting to ramp up, and over the next 10 to 15 years, we know that combustion engines are going to ramp down. So I think Tiguan's been in our lineup for some period of time. I think we're still predicting that, yes, the market is going to come on strong for battery electric vehicles, but when you talk about the Tiguan segment today, you're talking about over 4 million cars. And only today, still a very small portion of those are electric. So I think Tiguan makes sense. Tiguan is the right car. It's the right car for today. And I think probably for the next, call it 5 to 7 years, it's still going to be an important car in our lineup. And yes, I think we are going to hit a phase where we have very similar cars, one with a combustion engine and one with an ICE engine, one with a BEV engine. And that's going to have to happen during this transition period because you're not going to migrate everyone overnight. So I think we've got 3 SUVs this year. We also have announced the smaller Taos, and the Taos and Tiguan will live alongside each other, much like many other brands have had a dual strategy. And because that segment is just so big, ID4 makes sense as a battery electric vehicle to land it there. That felt like the right place to put an electric vehicle. A lot of Americans are buying cars there. And those two will coincide for a couple of years, for probably many years to come, until really that entire switch has been made from the combustion engines to the battery electric vehicles.
Was there ever a temptation to make the Tiguan a BEV, or did you always think that you would have a separate vehicle?
Yeah, I think the way the strategies panned out in Germany was really to create a completely new and unique family, which is ID. So there was always the intention and plan to have them, kind of very separate, so that it was very clear when you walked onto a showroom floor that ID meant electric and it was different to the combustion powered engines. Now, who knows? I mean, down the line, for sure, we have a couple icons in our lineup that maybe one day may sunset. So who knows, potentially as some of those cars sunset, maybe they get reincarnated as an ID, and obviously the naming in and around that, I think for sure we'll need to debate down the line. But it was very clear, I think, from the start to differentiate the electric vehicles, ID was the family name given to them, and that's why we called it ID4.
Sebastian, you got the floor.
All right. So going back to the idea of kind of competing with yourself, if a customer comes in now, how are you talking to your dealers about which direction you should send them? Do most customers come in saying, I want an EV? If someone comes in and says, I'm looking for, just a CUV, are the dealers being said, please look at the ID4 as well as the gas-powered ones? Or are the dealers basically saying, well, we know how to sell gas-powered cars, so here, come look at the Tiguan? Like, what have you done with your dealers to encourage them to sell this? And let's be honest, do you think that'll be enough to reach the sales numbers that I think that you've been talking about? Because, not everyone is ready to make the switch, even though those of us who've driven it or who know about EVs think, well, yeah, now's the time. But yeah. What is the dealership training, and how do you deal with a customer that maybe doesn't quite know what they want?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing about ID4 and probably most electrics out there, as you know, Sebastian, is you have to experience them. And ideally, and it's not that easy because we don't have limitless demos, but you've actually got to live with it for a period of 2 or 3 days. Because when I think you realize, a lot of people look at 250 miles of range and go, that's just not enough. At the end of the day, when you look at, particularly under COVID restrictions, how much mileage you're doing on a daily basis, that might mean you only need to charge your vehicle once every 2 weeks. So I think what we've trained our dealers to do, and this is something we're working very hard on with ID4, is to make sure you get customers to drive the vehicle. We've got a cross-country team that's touring at the moment that's doing test drives. So getting bums and seats is absolutely critical if you want to convert a customer into ID4. It has got a thrilling driving experience. It's got the instant torque. It gives you the space of an SUV. So once you've got inside the car, once you've driven the car, if you've been considering an EV, I think it becomes a very compelling offer. Back to your question on Tiguan and how we treat a customer walking into the showroom looking for an SUV. It is difficult because we've got 3 SUVs. I mean, it's a good dilemma to have, but ultimately Taos is a little bit more affordable than Tiguan. It's packaged a little bit smaller. So if you're looking for a 2-row car, if cost of ownership is critical for you, if fuel consumption is critical for you, but you still want kind of a fun compact SUV, Taos I think makes a lot of sense. Tiguan's roughly 9 to 10 inches bigger than Taos. It has the optional 3rd row too, one of the few compact SUVs that still offers that. It offers you a little bit more trunk space if you've got the 3rd row flat. It's got a 2-liter turbocharged engine. So if cost of ownership is not that critically important for you and you're looking for a little bit more space, then obviously Tiguan makes a whole lot of sense. And then, as I said, ultimately ID4, we're encouraging dealers to get customers into ID4. I think it's very clear that electric vehicles is our future. So we're trying very hard to get as many bums into seats. And I think if you're a customer that wants a simple experience, that also wants to contribute towards the environment, that enjoys instant torque, that enjoys comfort, that enjoys simplicity and minimalism, I definitely think once you're inside the ID4, it's going to tick those boxes for you.
But it still sounds like a lot of that is coming from the customer.
This episode is sponsored by Now What's Next, a Morgan Stanley podcast that helps make sense of life after the pandemic. Host Sonari Glinton talks with people about how they are rethinking age-old assumptions and finding new opportunities. Now, what's next? There's a new podcast called Now What's Next from Morgan Stanley. It's filled with stories of people trying to adapt to and look beyond the global crisis we're facing. Chefs, entrepreneurs, healthcare workers, grounded world travelers. There's even an astronaut. Their stories are unique and their outlooks are optimistic. Listen to Now What's Next wherever you get your podcasts.
For themselves, I'm not hearing anything about the dealers really being trained or asked to promote this over an ICE and to someone who doesn't have a preference when they come in. Or do those customers just not really exist?
Yeah, maybe I don't understand your question quite clear. I mean, at the end of the day, the dealers are going to have demos on ID4, right? They are encouraged to, when a customer walks in, I think the first thing you're trying to understand is what are you looking for? I think if the customer says, I'm generally looking for an SUV somewhere around the $30,000 mark, I think there are, two options, which is the Taos and the Tiguan. If that budget is stretched a little bit, then of course the discussion is, hey, we've got the all-new ID4, it's electric, have you ever considered an electric car? If the answer is, well, I have, but I haven't quite thought about it, I'm a little bit worried about range, and I'm worried about this and charging and all that kind of stuff, then the discussion engages to say, look, by the way, this vehicle takes away your range anxiety. It's got 3 years of fast charging. For $600 you can put a wall box in your home and you never have to see a gas station again. This car is electric, but it's not intimidating. Take a seat inside. See how easy and simple it is to drive. Take it for a test drive. So I think at the end of the day, we've got ID ambassadors in each and every single dealership. So we've got a specialist who sits in the dealership and knows everything about ID. So I think it's kind of feeling the customer out in terms of preference. I guess people have different preferences, and definitely if there's a tendency that they're open to an EV, of course we're jumping all over them with the ID ambassadors and getting them into a car.
Hi, and we've got another more of a comment here from a viewer, Milton Piantowski. He says he's got a reservation for an ID4, but he also says what I really want is an ID Buzz, and wants to know, does having an ID4 get him priority to get a Buzz?
We haven't, I must be honest, we haven't quite thought that far. But for sure, we are quite, internally, we're serious about loyalty. We are coming out and looking for new ways to improve loyalty within our brand. So I'm sure that definitely having an ID4 is not going to harm him when he lines up for an ID Buzz.
Hein, one of the things that surprised me when I got into the ID4, as you mentioned, you have the key fob in your pocket and you open the door and you sit down and then you just drive away, that you don't have to push a button to start the vehicle. You just engage the gear selector and you go. So, I mean, what's the thinking behind that?
I think it's ease of use. I mean, I've been with the company for 15 years and across 3 or 4 different continents. And I've always loved the fact that no matter where I fly, when I land and I get a rental Volkswagen, it's familiar. Everything works. You know how the AC works. You know where the controls are. It's just so simple to use. So I think, and as you can understand, people thinking about EVs are potentially intimidated by them. And I think the thinking behind this was to have something that's not intimidating. The screen is large, it's functional, but it's not overbearing. And the thinking really behind this car was to try and make it as simple and as easy to use. So as you said, you literally sit down in the seat, you twist the toggle, it's in drive, and you hit the accelerator and off you go. So that's what it's really about. I think that ease of use also extends obviously into the HMI and infotainment, the ability to talk to the vehicle and give it certain instructions and commands. And then also the HMI screen, I think, is also very simple and very easy to use. So I think name of the game is ease of use and just again trying to avoid intimidation. It's a simple car to use, and that's something that we're quite proud of. Obviously, when you stop, you've got the park button on the edge of the joystick, as you can see in the image over here. You hit that, and the vehicle's parked.
And I think that ID cockpit, the screen that is on the steering column, is just brilliant.
Yeah, so that for me is one of the big features. I'm a 6'5" giant, and very often when I get into a vehicle and adjust the steering column, I sometimes, I lose a little bit of the dash. The beauty of this one is it's mounted on the steering column, and I've driven a couple of the competitors, and as soon as you go up and down with the steering column, often that steering wheel sometimes gets within your display. So that's one of the features I really enjoy about the car. Being 6'4", raising the steering column and making sure that the cockpit, the 5.3 in cockpit, is still well within my view because it's not being interrupted by the steering wheel, I think is pretty cool. And everything that you need is there. You're not distracted by having to turn your head to a big screen on the right-hand side, which I think is great.
Well, that sounds like, a comment about Tesla, which has the big screen, but I know that VW also has at least some history with electric vehicles with the Golf E. How much of the design of this interior was really based on hearing from either other drivers or specifically other EV drivers or potential EV drivers about what they wanted in a car like the ID4? Obviously, this is a global vehicle, so I'm guessing you talk to people, Volkswagen talk to people around the globe for this.
Yeah, so we've got a massive research department that extends across the world. Obviously, a lot of the research is also done. China is a big market for the Volkswagen brand, so a fair amount of research done there. A lot of research clearly done through Europe too. And as I mentioned, I think at the end of the day, please, it was no dig at Tesla from my part. I think in the Volkswagen, it's about trying to make it as simple and easy as possible to use. Functional is one of the key things we spend a lot of time on. We spent a lot of time looking at the JD Power IQS feedback on where we can improve to be ergonomically better inside the vehicle. So yes, a fair amount of research done, but a very clear statement made that the critical information needs to be in front of you and visible. That's one of the key guiding principles when they developed the new ID range.
Hi, and Scott from Asheville points out that Ford's coming out with the Maverick small pickup truck. Hyundai's coming out with the Santa Cruz. He's wondering if there could be a small truck coming off the MEB platform. And he says he knows that you cannot comment on future product, but maybe you could blink 3 times if it's going to happen.
Now I'm going to be careful not to blink. Yeah, so I think in previous discussions, we've made it quite clear that we did consider in the combustion world, of course, a small pickup. I know that there's also, been some discussions globally in the VW brand. We've had an Amarok, which is a kind of, I would call a B-size pickup in many other markets, which is a great product, by the way. So there's been a lot of discussion about how to break the pickup market here in the US and how to get into that. I think we also, at a couple motor shows many years ago, showed some sort of an Atlas-derived pickup too, So we've been trying to get into that space. I think our group has come out very strong now with a strategy to transform to battery electric vehicles. So for sure, I think a combustion-powered pickup is for us definitely a thing of the past. But a new battery electric platform does open new doors for us, and it does kind of level maybe the playing field to a certain degree, and does give us potentially the opportunity to either bring some sort of a small mid-sized pickup, or maybe something even a little bit larger. I think we're very aware that the US market is big on mid-sized SUVs too. We've entered with Atlas and Crossport, so it wouldn't be remiss to potentially at some stage think about something larger on the BEV platform too. And if we do build a large SUV on the BEV platform, maybe a large pickup might potentially also make sense.
Hein, let me ask you about an existing product. In Europe, there's the ID3. Why is there no ID3 in the US market?
I think one of the main concerns, on ID3 is that it's not right now available as an all-wheel drive. Obviously, a big portion of the US market is needing all-wheel drive. I think this was one of the driving factors. I think we were also, when we started looking at ID3, aware that with ID4, the range and battery efficiency was going to improve. So that was also one of the considerations. And then I just think if you look at just purely the body style that is ID3, which obviously is compact and hatch, and you see what's happened to that hatch market in the United States, we needed to hedge our bets somewhere, and the mid-size or compact SUV seemed to make a lot more sense than a small compact hatch. And I think that's why we went with the ID4.
Go ahead, Sebastian.
Yeah, if the that size vehicle is sort of what the market research sort of shows people want, you're still talking about things like the ID Buzz, which are a little more out there. What can you talk about the line between, selling the mass appeal, mass market vehicles? If I remember right, for the ID4, Volkswagen is hoping to sell about 150,000 worldwide this year and 2 million over the course of life. Are those numbers correct?
Yeah, those numbers sound about correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know how many of those do you hope to sell in the U.S.?
So I think in our first year, we're a little bit limited. We obviously are importing the vehicle from Europe. That factory in Europe has just ramped up, and they're basically supplying, the demand for Europe and also the United States. So we're a little bit limited in year one. But by the time we localize the vehicle in Chattanooga in 2023, the plan is definitely to ramp it up a lot more. And then, yes, we are kind of looking at numbers north of 6 digits. So we want to definitely crest that 100,000 mark by the time we localize the car in Chattanooga. So that's the thinking. The thinking is to import the car literally for the next 2 years. I think we've already publicly announced that we're breaking ground in Chattanooga to build a factory to build these vehicles. And then by the time we localize, potentially introduce a slightly more affordable version, hopefully, with a smaller battery that's more efficient. At that stage, for sure, we hopefully, got good recognition on the brand in the market. And by that stage, we want to kind of crest the 100,000 mark. Mark's just correcting me at 2. So I said 23 on the localization. We will localize the car late in 22 already. So by late 22, we'll be churning those out of Chattanooga, and hopefully in 23, we'll be cresting over 100,000 units a year.
Hein, what's your thought in terms of market share going forward once you get that localized? And I ask it from this sense. Adding SUVs to your lineup in the U.S. market has done wonders for Volkswagen of America.
Yeah.
The Atlas, the Tiguan, now you're coming out with the Taos. What do you think once you get these electrics here? Could you be pulling in customers who otherwise might never have considered going to Volkswagen? Can you grow your market share based on electrics?
We need to. We really have to. I think to have a German-engineered company and to run at the share that we're running at the moment is difficult, and it is tough. We've seen that some of the challenges are for sure still that recognition is a bit of a challenge. Some folk out there still don't know about Atlas, don't know about CrossSport. So that is still a bit of a challenge. And then I think what's also going to be difficult is as we hit this transition phase where people are kind of semi into combustion, semi into EV, you kind of almost split the market in half. So even if you're doing very well in one portion, you're doing very well in a portion of the market, right? So I think that's going to be challenging. I think we've made it quite clear that we want to try and be pioneers, right? We want to try and get there first. We want to try and grow there first. I think our brand has made a very clear statement. It is our future. So yes, I do believe we will be pulling in customers from other brands, which I think is important. I think we're also internally working on a lot of credentials that will help improve our loyalty so we keep our existing customers. And yes, the plan is to grow. The plan is to put electric SUVs into the market, the body style that the US market is really looking for. And then hopefully as we then transition across to a market that eventually becomes 70, 80, 90% BEV, of course, the plan is definitely to try and increase our market share dramatically.
Hey, we've got to take a quick commercial break right now. We're going to be back in a jiffy talking more about Volkswagen, electric cars, and especially the ID4. All right, we're back. Go ahead, Gary.
So, Hein, I want to pick up on your last comment. You were talking about how there are people in the U.S. that are not familiar with products like the Atlas and the CrossSport. And so you need to reach those people to get them to come into showrooms to see those vehicles and spend time with those vehicles and ideally buy those vehicles. At the same time, you're with the ID4, you're saying, okay, we want to bring in people that otherwise perhaps would not go to Volkswagen at all. So how do you clarify your messaging to both of these people?
Yeah, it's a toughie. I mean, look, and at the end of the day, I think we all understand that the US commercial market and the advertising market is so busy. Again, I've worked in a couple markets. I've never seen a market with so many brands And now you split these brands as well between, gasoline-powered car and EV-powered cars. So I think what we've come out with, I think, is quite a strong angle on the ID4, which is not really trying to split the two. It's saying, hey, you're a customer that could potentially spend between $32,000 and $45,000. Here's a slightly different alternative for you. And I think that's really the angle that we're taking in. I think you'll see when our communication on ID4 comes out, it's not about, hey, EV customer, here's an EV alternative for you. And I think this is why we're saying EVs, we know, SUVs are an important body style. We've got a range of 5 SUVs. We'd like you to come and experience them, and we've got alternatives within that range. So I think that's kind of the angle of attack that we're taking. We're an SUV brand, a proudly SUV brand that's got a lot of options. I think that's the kind of message that we're trying to take. I think the marketing is difficult. When you've got 5 SUVs and you've got to try and build nameplate awareness for each one of those, it is extremely, extremely challenging. And you've got to keep that communication going, or that nameplate awareness drops, and all of a sudden, you don't get the showroom traffic on that particular car. So we've probably still got too many sales where a customer enters the showroom floor, sees another vehicle, and then buys that. So we really need to try and get a little bit better at getting our products out there, getting the nameplates out there, showing people what these cars can do and what makes them great. And yes, for sure, I think the message on the ID4 and the ICE vehicles are a little bit separate, but at the end of the day, we're a family of 5 SUVs with lots of options, and I think that's the angle we're taking.
Did you ever think about a sub-brand? I mean, that you'd like when Scion existed, that you could go into a Toyota showroom and there was the Scion area over there and the Toyota stuff over there?
Yeah, ID in its own right, from my perspective, is a bit of a sub-brand, okay? And I think the other difficulty that we face as a relatively small brand in the US market is if we now split one brand into 2, you already, again, are doubling your marketing efforts to get 2 brands out there. And obviously, I think, VW's history in the US is clear. And I think ID also, represents to some degree a little bit of a redemption story. So having ID as a brand, saying that we're invested in going electric, I think also does something for the VW brand. So I think it's a sub-brand within the VW brand, which again, for a very small player in the US context, I think makes a lot of sense.
One of the potential good outcomes is you sell in the US over whatever the federal tax credit limit is, 200 or 250,000, ID4s or BEVs altogether. And then the numbers you were talking about earlier, where the $40,000 car has a tax credit into the low 30s, that ends up going away. But right now, congressional leaders are asking, or Democratic congressional leaders are asking President Biden to either extend the tax credits that currently exist or even expand them, including used EV sales. There's a whole bunch of things that are potentially happening. How is Volkswagen looking at this? Are you talking to people in Congress? I'm sure that you're not that far from DC, or are you just hoping that by the time you get to those sales numbers, you will have reduced the price enough that it's not as important?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of variables, Sebastian, and you've hit the nail on the head. Firstly, yes, we are talking to them. We are involved in those discussions. We're having those discussions, and obviously it's clear, that these discussions, I think, are going in the right direction. We don't quite know exactly how the cards are going to land, but at least all the signs that we're seeing are super positive. The extension of the federal tax incentives and so on and so on. So the signs look extremely positive. Secondly, I think what's going to happen, as we discussed earlier, battery efficiency is going to get a lot better. So, out of a 55 or 62 kilowatt hour battery, we believe you're going to get significantly better range. And then also we believe quite strongly, and there have been some announcements made in our group too, of the cost of batteries coming down. Tesla's also made some announcement of cost of batteries coming down. So I think what you're going to end up finding is today you probably see that the sweet spot of a battery electric vehicle is anywhere in terms of pricing between $40,000 and $65,000. You take the $7,500 tax credit off. Then if there's localization savings and if there's some sort of credits for incentivizing localization of production for BEVs, if the federal tax credits continue, if the battery costs come down, if the efficiencies go up, you all of a sudden, I think, are going to start seeing battery electric vehicles potentially coming in well under the 30 grand. And that's, I think, going to create this tipping scale where people start going, okay, the charging stations are there, everyone's driving BEVs, it's now becoming, there's so many of them out there. I've now lived with one. It makes a lot of sense. It drives great. I don't have to go to the gas station. I'm also doing something good for the environment. And then this whole thing, in my view, starts tipping a little bit. So yes, I mean, of course, it's a transition strategy. It is still a bit of a bet because a lot of what you mentioned, Sebastian, is still very unclear. But we do believe those signs are there, and we believe that that's the right strategy.
Hi, we've got another question here from Dick Lee, who says, some people in the U.S. have been disappointed by the 0 to 60 time of the ID4, 8.5 seconds. He says, when this is brought up, how are your product specialists trained to respond?
So I don't quite know. I seem to recall it was probably 7.8, and it is on.
This episode is sponsored by Now What's Next, a Morgan Stanley podcast that helps make sense of life after the pandemic. Host Sonari Glinton talks with people about how they're rethinking age-old assumptions and finding new opportunities. Now, what's next? This episode is sponsored by Now What's Next, a Morgan Stanley podcast that helps make sense of life after the pandemic. Host Sonari Glinton talks with people about how they're rethinking age-old assumptions and finding new opportunities. Now, what's next?
On the rear-wheel drive right now, we are still introducing an all-wheel drive derivative that will be quicker. Probably, I think it will shave at least 1.5 seconds off that time. So we are going to have a derivative that's going to come out with a quicker 0 to 60. But again, this is not a Tesla performance car. This is a compact SUV. And when you look at, kind of 0 to 60 times of not far off a Golf GTI, I would say that it's still pretty punchy for a compact SUV. And if you look at a Tiguan, a RAV4, a CX-5 or a CR-V, this car's still plenty sporty compared to one of those. So, yeah, I don't think we're intending to win a drag race with this car, but I'd still say that it's very responsive, getting that instant torque, and for a compact SUV, it's quick.
Hey, we've got this in that came via Twitter. Margino Cefalia wants to know, does the liftgate open and close with a button or a digital button on the default screen so I don't have to click through menus?
Yeah, so I think I need to double check. I'm not 100% certain. I know that we have got a Kessie Open feature too on the statement package, which allows you to open the liftgate at the rear with your foot. To be quite honest, Mark, I don't know, maybe I'll get a response from Mark. I'm not quite sure exactly where that liftgate button is on the interior. I seem to recall it might be on the door, but I might be wrong. So I might need to get back to you on that one, John.
Okay, sure thing.
Hein, one of the things that struck me about driving the ID4 was that it seemed like a normal car, and I mean that in a good way. I don't mean that to put it down. And I mean, you have all the technology there. Was there thinking that you wanted to make this a vehicle that would be very accessible to people?
Absolutely. I think, if you come out with a statement like we want to try and be an EV for the masses, and we want to be the EV where potentially you invoke that switch from a combustion car to an electric car, I think you've got to make that transition as smooth as possible. And again, I think in terms of usability and how simple it is to use, I think that was definitely part of the thinking and part of the planning. We are, the vehicle, again, just from an ergonomics perspective, is just so simple to use. And I climbed into the first time and I thought to myself, wow, this doesn't intimidate me at all. I can imagine, and I'm a petrol head, so I can imagine for somebody who's literally using their vehicle from A to B and is not maybe even fussed by all the gimmicks that the car does contain, still gets into that vehicle and goes, oh, this is pretty easy. And that definitely was part of the thinking, yes.
And you mentioned earlier about the producing it in Chattanooga. Right now we're seeing, especially with the boat, in halfway through the Suez Canal where it's turned sideways right now, messing up all kinds of, supplies being shipped throughout the world, not necessarily just automotive. But with COVID, with these sort of situations, localization can make a lot of sense. But then we come down to some of the rare earth minerals that can be harder to find. I know that Canada and the U.S. recently sort of signed not really an agreement, but sort of made statements about how Canada wants to help the U.S. to manufacture more electric vehicles here. What can you tell us about sourcing those kind of materials, both for the plants in Europe, China, and specifically for the U.S., if you know? little far out.
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit out of my realm. I think what I can tell you is that in terms of the USMCA, obviously we are trying to localize as much as possible on the car. I think we've also, made it quite clear that we've got a battery manufacturer strategy over here. So I think in terms of that, Sebastian, we're trying to localize as much of that as possible. To the degree that I would guess, have suppliers available in the North American region that can help us supply and source those parts.
Hey, we've got two more questions here from viewers, from Frank and John Kinsfather. They're kind of the same thing. They said there's been some reported problems with charging with Electrify America. Has that been corrected? And they also want to know, what about just plug and charge and go, no need for credit cards or anything like that? Yeah, so we're aware of that. I think there has been one or two articles written that it's a little bit of a tedious process. It's not impossible to use. It's a little bit challenging, but for sure it's pretty simple still to use. We are working on a plug and charge solution, which is going to be available later on this year. So it is something that we're working on. It is something we're addressing, and it is something that will be rectified later this year.
So for people who don't understand what that basically means, is that this would be, you'd plug the car in and the charging device would recognize the car and start the charging. You're
pre-registered. You don't need to go on an app. You don't need to set anything on your app. You don't need to do anything like that. You basically rock up at the charging station. It recognizes the vehicle. You put the charger in and your vehicle will charge up. As I said, that'll be available, I'd say probably in the fall, and that will be an over-the-air update.
So that's even simpler than pumping gasoline that you have.
100%. Exactly. It's very quick. It's very simple, very seamless. Yes.
Say, we're going to have to wrap up the segment right now, but Hein, I want to thank you for coming on the show. You've been very gracious with your time. You've been great with your answers. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you for your time. It was great spending time with you. Great meeting you, John, Gary, and Sebastian. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Hein.
Thank you.
Well, good. We're going to take another quick commercial break. We'll be back in a jiffy.
The world is changing at an ever-increasing pace. No matter what the mode of transportation, there is always the need for an efficient propulsion system. And that's exactly what BorgWarner has been doing since the earliest days of the automotive industry. We create innovative mobility technologies that reduce energy consumption and emissions while improving performance. Our proven track record has made us an industry leader in forward-looking propulsion solutions for combustion, hybrid, and electric vehicles.
All right, we're back.
So that was interesting. And, when I knew that we were going to have him on the show, and I know that, the strategy that Volkswagen has is to make an affordable vehicle, I started thinking that if we look at electric vehicles that are available out there right now, I mean, we could count like basically on our hands the number of regularly affordable electric vehicles, with all of the emphasis going to luxury marques, that they're all coming out with vehicles. So I thought, let's take a look at the sales of luxury vehicles. Okay, so for 2020. So in 2020, Audi sold 187,000 vehicles, Acura sold 137,000 vehicles, BMW 308,000, Cadillac 129,000, Daimler 325,000, Infiniti 80,000, Lincoln 105,000. Okay, so basically we're talking about 1.4 million units. Okay, and it struck me that if every single one of those vehicles was an EV, it doesn't make the market. I mean, it's less than 10%. I mean, so do you guys think that in order for EVs to become a real thing, they're going to need to be more ID4s, more, Kia Niros and electric Konas and Bolt EVs and even Mach-E's? I mean, where do you guys think this is going to go?
Go ahead, Sebastian.
It has to. Right? Like the answer has to be yes. I mean, you can't, if you're talking about selling cars to more people, you have to make them non-luxury. People have to be able to afford these things. Watching electric vehicles become a thing over the last 15-ish years, or I guess 10 if we want to sort of start with the launch of the Leaf and the Volt and the first Teslas, like you can see the value in the luxury positioning that Tesla has done. But yeah, we need, as much as people have criticized Nissan for different things and the troubles they had early with the Leaf, like they started in this segment. And so it's possible, it's always been possible, their struggles aside. But now going forward, now really the technology has evolved a lot in the last 10 years. And so not only is what you're saying correct that it needs to happen, but it's also, I think, based on people I talk to, these sort of interviews, it seems also feasible now. I mean, the ID4 is a prime example, right?
John, it sort of strikes me, and you wrote a piece about this, about how the OEMs are missing a lower segment of the market. And, I was thinking if we do go back to the original, days of Henry Ford, I mean, think about it. His objective was not to make an expensive coach-built vehicle. His objective was to make a vehicle that the regular citizen could afford to buy. Okay. And back then, the technology was as exotic as EVs are today, or as technologically challenging. Let's put it that way. And yet, had he not done that, who knows how this industry would have formed.
You're exactly right. Remember, Henry Ford's early investors wanted him to build big, expensive cars for the rich that they could make a lot of profit on. And Henry's idea was, no, let's relentlessly attack costs and keep chopping prices. And they did that throughout almost the entire history of the Model T. The price would go down. And he made up for it in scale. And it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. You lower the price, you get more scale, which drives your cost down, which you lower the price, and so on and so forth. And that's where we're going to have to get to with electric vehicles. Because to your point, Gary, and that's a great one, they can't all be luxury cars. As you said, it's a little over 1 million units a year. Well, on a dollar basis, it's significant. But on a volume basis, it's not enough to move the needle. As significant as it would be to sell 1 million luxury electric cars, for the industry to truly go electric, it's got to become very affordable, like Sebastian said.
So why is this not happening?
Right.
Again, I mean, we're seeing small exceptions, right? And if you're looking at the commitment, I mean, Volkswagen, I mean, it's bet a lot of chips on things going electric, right?
Bet the farm, yeah.
And but I mean, if you look at other brands, they're saying, okay, yeah, we're going to have electric this and electric that, and then General Motors says, oh, Cadillac will be all electric. But I mean, what was the number? Cadillac sold 130,000 vehicles last year. I mean.
In the U.S.
In the U.S. I mean, so not huge numbers. So if every single one of those was an EV, that would be significant, except for the fact that in the U.S. Tesla sold 293,000 vehicles last year, right? I mean, so this is good that they're doing that, but I mean, is that enough?
I think part of the answer as to how do you make that happen is what I was trying to get Hein to talk about with the dealership, because talking to people who have been promoting EVs forever now, that is one of the key sticking points and why Tesla has done what it's done with its own separate salespeople, own separate stores, not mixing in with, if you had like an ID section and a VW section of the VW dealership, someone needs to say to these dealers, for every gas car you sell or every two, you need to sell an EV or something like that, to really get these out the door. And I haven't seen that sort of push. In the distance, they're talking about it. Yes, like you said, General Motors aspiring to be carbon neutral by 2035 or whatever the claims were. These are things that Volkswagen has said it's going to do, that other companies said they're going to do. But right now, if they're going to be bringing these cars, I guess for the next few years, they'll be a little bit supply constrained. But once they start making them down in Tennessee, they've got to really push their dealers to be like, if that customer comes in and doesn't quite know what they want, take them to the ID4 first. Get those butts in that seat of the ID4 first before you show them the Taos, before you show them the stinky Tiguan, and let them compare that. And I think that'll make more of a market shift than maybe anything.
My opinion is too much is being put on the dealer here when it comes to EV sales. And I say that because where there's hot EVs, Porsche Taycan, Mustang Mach-E, it's no problem. Customers come in looking for that vehicle. These days, people don't go into a dealership and go, what should I buy? 99% of them have done all their shopping online already. They know what they want. They're going to go in and maybe take a test drive. They're certainly going to start negotiating with their trade-in and on the MSRP. But they don't go in unsure of what they want to buy. Very few people do. And I think what's really going to move the needle is having hot, compelling product that people really want. And, these days, and dealerships don't like to hear me say this, the salespeople don't sell. They don't come in and razzmatazz and, hey, we're going to put you. No. They know where the right paperwork is in the right drawer. They know how to go through the screens on the computer to fill in your order form. They know how to send you to F&I. They know how to get the car prepped and to you. And so I'll tell you right now, good example. One of my brothers wants to buy a Corvette. He lives in Northern California. The dealers are very little help to him. Very uninterested in helping him track down a car. So it's not an EV-only problem is what I'm getting to. Dealers are not just trying to push piston engines because that's what they've always done and ignore the EVs. In fact, if you talk to Chevrolet dealers in the Bay Area, they don't have any problem selling Bolts whatsoever. Now, if you go to Mid-Ohio, it's probably a different story. So I think the real solution to really getting EV sales going is compelling products that people really want to have.
Well, it's interesting you guys are talking about dealers. I was looking at the study that came out that Cox Automotive had done on digitization of end-to-end retail. And so basically looking at dealerships. And there were some John, as you said, most people are searching online. And so there's some statistics in there that I thought were rather interesting that, number of dealerships visited by buyers. In 2016, it was 2.7. Now it's down to 2. Time spent at dealerships. In 2016, it was 2 hours and 55 minutes. In 2020, it's down to 2 hours and 37 minutes. Doesn't seem like a lot, but as a percentage basis, it's getting down there. Percentage of people who say, I want to take my time at a dealership, in this is astonishing. In 2014, 74% of the people said that they wanted to take their time at a dealership. That's down to 43% in 2020. And 76% of people are open to the idea of all online transactions. Okay. So to your point, Sebastian, is it going to be where the people that are likely to be in the word early adopter isn't quite so accurate anymore. As you pointed out, it's been more than 10 years, but I mean, people that are willing to make the shift from ICEs to EVs may be younger and say, you know what, I'm just ordering this thing online. It's.
Yeah. Well, I think this gets back to something I wanted to ask John for a little bit of his thoughts on it, where you're right that different people, especially different ages, different demographics, have different ideas of what they're looking for, how they want to buy it, et cetera. But if dealers in the Bay Area have no problem selling the Volt and dealers in Ohio might, then does the EV adoption speak to a bigger cultural issue? Because we can all make our assumptions about what's happening in Oakland versus what's happening in Middle Ohio. Then it almost doesn't matter what the car actually is or how they perform. There's deeper things that are happening that are preventing people to make that shift. Or are the electric trucks going to be the ones that finally, push people over?
Yeah, no, I think you're onto something there. I think it is cultural. I believe EV adoption is going to be all over the map. It's going to vary by region. It's going to vary by demographic group. It's going to vary by market segment. It's probably even going to vary by season. When, it's cold outside and EV batteries are not getting as good a range, I bet you the sales go down in the snow belt. But what I'm getting at is there's going to be an adoption rate. And I believe that automakers that really figure out which age group, which demographic, which region, which segment are hot to go on EVs right now, pour as much as you can into that. Recognizing that, and you know how it goes, Sebastian, I'm sure you've got skeptical friends or family members who go, I don't know about electrics. You get them in electric and they go, wow, I had no idea. This is pretty cool. So that's going to be the thing that changes people's minds. There's going to be this cultural block to overcome. The fastest way to overcome it is, as Heinz said earlier in the show, put bums in seats. I'm astonished that they don't do, the automakers and their dealers don't do a much more aggressive test drive program. Everybody knows you put butts in seats, you're going to increase sales. But I know that's kind of a long about answer to your question. But I think adoption is going to be all over the map.
Yeah, just a quick anecdote on. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say I think it's less about culture and more about convenience. That okay, if you're living in, and it doesn't matter where it is, middle of whatever. I mean, if there are 10 gas stations around and 0 charging stations around, I mean, it doesn't matter how good the vehicle is or how persuasive the dealer is. You're just not going to buy one. It doesn't make any sense. If you live in California, hell, you're likely to buy a hydrogen vehicle because, there's a hydrogen infrastructure there. Would I buy a hydrogen car in the greater Detroit area? Of course not, because it's too difficult to find any place to get hydrogen.
But and here's my question.
Deals on used Mirais right now.
Yeah, I'm sure there are.
Here's my question to you guys. Could you, as an automaker, figure out, okay, we're going after a different customer with this electric car, this one undefined one. It's not going to do everything that your gasoline engine car does. It's not going to go as far. But if you're someone who drives, make up a number, 50 miles a day, wow, this is the car for you. If all you're going to use this car for is driving back and forth to work, we're going to save you thousands of dollars over the ownership, the lifetime of this vehicle, and target it that way rather than try to come out with an electric and say, this just automatically replaces your internal combustion engine car, and just say, no, let's go after the great attributes of what electrics can do and sell it differently. Ergo, we can put in a much smaller battery, take the price way down, and really satisfy the needs of consumers. But let them know up front, you're not going to want to do a cross-country trip in this car. You're going to want to use this for everyday commuting.
That's the nut that these automakers have been trying to crack for quite a while. I've seen some of them do a good job at it, where they sort of come at it, that it's sort of EV marketing with a different angle. And I've said this before, but one of the early ads for, I don't even think they were calling it the Taycan at that point, but an electrified, I think they were still calling it the Mission E. When Porsche first had an ad for that, they showed someone getting in their car at work, and they drove home at, the beautiful, typical car advertising landscapes of mountains and sunsets and everything. But there was an electric line running right alongside of the road, and the car was driving really fast. And as it passed the electric lines, their little spark kept moving with it. So it really emphasized how fast this car was. And you can very easily, put EVs up without necessarily putting gas engine cars down, although you could easily make that argument too with emissions and noise and cost and all that stuff. But there is a lot of marketing space available here, and I love to see it when I do see it, and I just want to see more of it.
And John, to your point, it seems to me that automakers have, with few exceptions, vehicles like Corvettes, have always wanted to make Swiss Army knife vehicles, right? And these are vehicles that can pretty much do anything, okay? And, and again, there are the exceptions, Chargers, Challengers, with Hellcat engines and so on. I mean, they're built for purpose, right? But nobody has been willing to say, okay, let's build a true, urban commuter vehicle, because they just are afraid that people are so oriented towards something that's going to take them 300 miles in that, sudden case where they say, oh my God, I got to leave. I got to go 300 miles right now.
Yeah.
And,
but Gary, you and I were talking about the Wuling Hongguang after last week's show, right. It was just you and I chatting. And so look at that car, $4,500. I mean, $4,500. And I figured it out on an inflation adjusted basis. That's what a Model T cost back in 1921. So here we are 100 years later, And that's the car that costs the same as a Ford Model T. And how's the Hongguang doing? It's doing fantastic in China. It's the number one selling EV, easily outsells anything from Tesla. Why? Because everyone can afford it. And they all go in knowing it's only got about 60 miles of range, and it'll only go about 60 miles an hour, and it rides pretty rough, and there's no airbags, and there's no blah, 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 blah. Everybody knows this. Why is it so popular? Because it's being sold as a fashion statement. They have all kinds of bright color combinations and things like that. And everyone knows it's perfect for crowded Chinese cities where you don't drive very far, you don't drive very fast, and finding a parking spot is a pain in the neck. The car is perfect. So they're not trying to sell it as, see the USA and your Chevrolet kind of an approach. No, they're saying, here's the specific purpose for this car. And because they've trained the consumer to know that's what this thing does, sales are going through the roof.
Can something like that be made aspirational here?
I believe it could. Yes, I do. I do believe it could. But again, the key is training or informing or educating the consumer. This is what it does. It doesn't do any of this other stuff. It does this, and it does it really well. And you can afford it. It's like when Honda came in with their Super Cub motorcycle. Any motorcycle owner in America that was riding a Harley or a BMW or a Triumph would look at that and go, that's crap. I don't want that. But Honda found all kinds of buyers who were never going to buy the other big bikes. I think the same thing could be done with a commuter electric.
Although to follow up on the whole notion of Honda, it seems to me that if we go back many years and a new Accord would come out, there would be glowing reviews of the Accord, and then there would be but it would be a much better vehicle if it had a V6 engine because it only had a 4, right? I mean, and year after year. And then finally Honda put in the 6. I mean, they gave up, they surrendered. And, it just seems to me that is the mindset that exists, that, we want more, we don't want less. And so, the Hongguang vehicle is less, it isn't more. And how do you convince someone that they really don't want, everything and then some?
You could talk a little bit more about, and this goes against what I said earlier about not raising or not putting one down to raise the other, but you could get more into what does an EV not do that ICEs do, i.e. emissions, and really point that out to shoppers and say, yeah, we still have questions about where we're getting the battery materials. What about battery recycling? It's not like an EV is an answer to everything that we're dealing with climate change, but it is making a positive change. And so that could tie into the aspirational thing, John, that you were talking about, that, okay, there's a little bit of a, smugness to it, a little bit of I'm doing something better, but there is a market there. There is a way to push that and really tell people, okay, you have your Swiss Army knife, but there's also that one attachment on it that you really don't want.
I don't quite see it that way. Remember when the Nissan Leaf came out, they did this whole environmental push. I mean, they even had polar bears in their ads, that if you bought this car, you'd keep the ice cap and the polar bears would still be able to eat all the seals they want. But I'm being facetious there. I think if you try to sell cars from an environmental standpoint, you're limited to 2 or 3% of the market. And it's even more so today, because if you come out and say, with the purchase of your vehicle, I'm doing my part to save the planet. Unfortunately, in today's political climate, you're making a political statement.
Right.
You're categorizing yourself as, I'm just going to call it X for now. I think people are reluctant to do that. I think that's one of the reasons that actually hurt hybrid sales, is people didn't want to go around telling people I drive a hybrid because it would categorize them. And so I think when you look at the success of, say, like the RAV4 hybrid, which sales are going through the roof on,